My arranged marriage husband refused to let me eat unless I called him daddy. His mother walked in during one of his demands and dragged him out of his own house. I met Rowan 3 weeks before our wedding. Our families had arranged everything. His parents were wealthy and respected in our community. My parents were eager to secure a good match for their only daughter. Nobody asked what I wanted because my opinion didn't matter in decisions about my own life. Rowan seemed normal during our brief courtship. He was polite and said the right things and smiled at the appropriate moments. He talked about building a life together and treating me with respect and being partners in everything. His mother praised him constantly and said I was lucky to marry such a good man. I believed them because I had no reason not to. The wedding was expensive and beautiful and felt like it belonged to someone else. I wore a dress I didn't choose and smiled for pictures I didn't want and said vows to a man I barely knew. Everyone told me I should be happy. Everyone said I had done well. Everyone expected gratitude for a life I never asked for. The first sign of trouble came on our wedding night. Rowan told me there were rules in his house. He said I needed to understand my place. He said he was the head of the household and I would respect that or face consequences. I asked what kind of consequences. He said I would find out if I misbehaved. I didn't know what misbehaving meant to him. I learned quickly. Rowan controlled everything. What I wore, where I went, who I talked to, how I spent my time. He gave me a schedule to follow every day and checked my phone every night. He monitored my conversations with my own parents. He decided when I slept and when I woke up and when I was allowed to leave the house. I had gone from my parents' daughter to his possession in a single ceremony. Then came the food rules. 2 weeks into our marriage, Rowan decided I needed to earn my meals. He said I had been eating too much and getting comfortable. He said I needed to show appreciation for everything he provided. He said from now on I would ask permission before eating anything in his house. I thought he was joking at first. He wasn't. The first time I went to the refrigerator without asking, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me away. He said I didn't have permission. I said I was hungry. He said hunger wasn't an excuse for disrespect. He said I could eat when I learned to follow rules. I went to bed hungry that night. The next morning, I asked permission to have breakfast. He said yes, but only if I asked properly. I asked what properly meant. He said I needed to call him daddy when I asked for food. He said it showed submission and respect. He said wives in his culture addressed their husbands with reverence, and this was how I would do it. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't reverence. This wasn't culture. This was degradation designed to break me down. I refused. He said fine. He said I could refuse as long as I wanted. He said the refrigerator would still be there when I changed my mind. I didn't eat for 2 days. On the third day, I was so weak I could barely stand. I went to him and forced the word out of my mouth because I needed food to survive. He smiled like he had won a war. He handed me a plate and said that wasn't so hard now, was it? I ate while crying and he watched the whole time looking satisfied. This became our routine. Every meal required the same degradation. Every bite of food cost me a piece of my dignity. I lost weight rapidly because I often chose hunger over humiliation. Rowan didn't care. He said I looked better thinner anyway. He said maybe this system was improving me in multiple ways. I stopped calling my parents because I was too ashamed to tell them what was happening. I stopped eating meals altogether some days. I started hiding small amounts of food in my room to avoid asking him for anything. He found my stash once and threw it all away. He said I was being sneaky and deceitful. He said he would have to watch me more closely now. His mother visited every Sunday for lunch. She adored Rowan and treated him like a perfect son. She never noticed anything wrong because Rowan behaved differently around her. He was charming and attentive and called me sweetheart in front of his mother. The moment she left, he went back to his rules and demands. I learned to perform normalcy during her visits. Then one Sunday, his mother arrived early. She had a key to the house because Rowan gave her one without asking me. She walked in while Rowan and I were in the dining room. He was standing in front of the refrigerator with his arms crossed. I was standing in front of him asking for permission to eat breakfast. She heard me call him daddy. She heard me beg for a plate of food. She heard him say I hadn't asked sweetly enough and I needed to try again. His mother dropped her purse on the floor. She asked what was happening here. Rowan's face changed instantly. He stepped away from the refrigerator and put his hands in his pockets like a teenager caught stealing. Mom, you're early, he said. She didn't look at him. She was looking at me. I was wearing a long-sleeve shirt in the middle of summer to hide how thin my arms had gotten. I was standing barefoot on the tile because Rowan had taken my shoes to the closet by the front door, so I couldn't leave the house quickly. I was shaking because I hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon, and my blood sugar was dropping and I was afraid. She saw all of it. His mother's name was Nadira. She was 5'2" and weighed maybe 120 pounds, and in that moment she looked like the tallest person I had ever seen. She walked past Rowan without acknowledging him and came straight to me. She put her hand on my arm and felt how thin it was, and her face went completely still. Then she opened the refrigerator and started taking things out. Eggs, bread, butter, fruit, cheese. She set them on the counter and told me to sit down and eat whatever I wanted and as much as I wanted. Rowan said, Mom, we were in the middle of something. She turned around slowly. I have never seen someone become so terrifying without raising their voice. She said, Rowan Farhat, if you say one more word, I will call your father and then I will call the police and you can explain to both of them why your wife looks like she hasn't eaten in a month. He shut his mouth. I sat at the counter and ate. I ate eggs and toast and fruit, and I couldn't stop eating and I couldn't stop crying, and the two things happened simultaneously, and I didn't care how I looked. Nadira stood next to me the entire time with one hand on my shoulder. She didn't speak. She just stood there. When I finished, she refilled my plate without asking, and I ate that too. Then she turned to Rowan and told him to sit down. He sat at the table across the room. She asked me how long this had been happening. I said 6 weeks. She asked me what exactly the rules were. I told her everything. The permission system. The word he made me say. The 2 days without food when I first refused. The schedule. The phone checks. The isolation. The shoes by the door. I told her about hiding crackers in my dresser drawer and him finding them and throwing them in the garbage while I watched. I told her about lying awake at night hungry, and him sleeping soundly beside me. I told her about calling in sick to my own body every morning because I didn't have enough fuel to function. When I finished, Nadira was gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles had gone white. She looked at Rowan. He was staring at the floor. She asked him one question. Where did you learn this? He said nothing. She asked again. Where did you learn that a wife is something you starve into obedience? He said it wasn't like that. She said, I heard you. I stood in that hallway and listened for 2 full minutes before I walked in. I heard her call you that word. I heard you tell her she wasn't sweet enough. I heard my son treat his wife like a dog performing for a treat. So I am asking you one more time. Where did you learn this? He didn't answer. She called Rowan's father. She said, Tariq, come to the house right now. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. The tone was enough. While we waited, Rowan tried to talk to me twice. The first time he leaned forward and said, you're going to feel really stupid when this calms down and everyone realizes you overreacted. Nadira said, if you speak to her again before your father arrives, I will throw you out myself. The second time he didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an expression I had seen many times before. The one that said, remember what happens when you embarrass me. Tariq arrived in 25 minutes. He was a quiet man who wore his authority the same way his wife did, calmly and completely. Nadira told him everything while I sat at the counter still holding a glass of water because my hands needed something to grip. She told him about the food rules, the degradation, the word, the starvation, the control. Tariq listened without moving. When she finished, he looked at Rowan for a long time, and then he looked at me and said, I am sorry. Then he looked at Rowan again. He said, pack a bag. Rowan started to argue. He said this was his house and his marriage. Tariq said this house was purchased with my money. Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the mortgage. You contribute nothing to this property. You don't pay the electric bill. You don't pay the water. You don't buy the groceries that you've been rationing to your wife like she's a prisoner of war. You are a guest in a house I provided and you used it as a prison. So you will pack a bag and come home with your mother and me and we will decide what happens next. Rowan stood up. His face was red. He said, you can't just throw me out of my own marriage. Tariq said, I am not throwing you out of your marriage. You destroyed your marriage the first time you stood between your wife and a meal. Now pack. Rowan went upstairs. I could hear drawers opening and closing. Something hit the wall. When he came back down, he had a duffel bag and his face was locked in that tight expression he wore when he was furious but outnumbered. He looked at me and said, this is not over. Tariq put his hand on Rowan's back and guided him toward the door. At the doorway, Tariq turned to me and said, this house is yours. Stay as long as you need. Nobody will force you out. Then they left. Nadira stayed another hour. She sat with me and asked careful questions about whether Rowan had ever hit me. I said no. She asked if he had threatened to. I said not with those exact words, but the threat was always there in how he moved and how he spoke and how the air in a room changed when I did something he didn't approve of. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. She told me something that stayed with me long after she left. She said when Rowan was 15, his father found out he had been bullying a younger boy at school, not physically. He would take the boy's lunch every day and make him ask for it back using specific words, specific phrases that were designed to humiliate. The boy's mother called the school, and the school called Tariq, and when Tariq confronted Rowan about it, Rowan said the boy liked it. He said it was a game they played. The boy's mother said her son came home hungry every day for 3 weeks. Tariq pulled Rowan out of that school and put him in counseling for 6 months. She said they thought he had grown out of it. She said the counselor told them it was resolved. She said she had spent the last 10 years believing her son was a good man because she needed to believe it and because he was very, very good at pretending. She said the food, the control over eating, it was the same thing he did to that boy. He just found a wife to do it to instead. Before she left, she gave me cash from her wallet. She put $400 on the counter and told me to buy whatever I needed. She said, do not ask anyone's permission for anything in this house. Then she locked the door behind her and I was alone. The silence was different now. Not the silence of being trapped, the silence of being released. I stood in that dining room for a long time just standing there. Then I opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water and drank it and put the bottle back, and it was the most powerful thing I had done in 6 weeks. The next day, I called my parents. My mother answered and I told her everything, and there was a long silence, and then she started sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. She kept saying, I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry. I told her about the food, about the word, about the 2 days I didn't eat, about the crackers in the dresser, about the shoes by the door. She listened to all of it, and by the end, she was making sounds I had never heard come from another person. Raw sounds. The sounds a mother makes when she realizes the life she arranged for her daughter was a cage. She handed the phone to my father, and he was already crying. My father was a man who had shown emotion maybe 3 times in my entire life, and he was weeping on the phone because his daughter had been starving in a house he helped send her to. He said, we did this to you. I said no. He said, yes, we did. We handed you to a stranger and walked away proud of ourselves. He said he would come get me right now. I said no. I said I needed to stay. I needed to be in this house by myself and learn what it felt like to live without rules that weren't mine. He didn't understand, but he didn't push. He just said, please eat something, and I said I already did, and he cried harder. Over the next 2 weeks, Rowan sent messages constantly. At first, he was apologetic. He said he loved me. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said he would change. He said he missed me. He said the house felt empty without me, and he couldn't sleep. Then when I didn't respond, the tone shifted. He said I was being dramatic. He said plenty of wives showed their husbands respect, and I was acting like he had committed a crime. He said his mother had no right to interfere in their marriage, and that I had humiliated him in front of his own family. He said I was ungrateful for everything he had given me. Then came the threats. He said he would tell the community I was unfaithful. He said he would make sure no one in our families ever spoke to me again. He said I was nothing before him, and I would be nothing after. He said I would come crawling back when I realized no one else would want me. I saved every single message. I took screenshots and emailed them them to an address I created specifically for this purpose. Something in me was building a wall out of evidence even before I knew I would need one. During those 2 weeks alone, I did things that would seem meaningless to anyone else. I went to the grocery store at 9 o'clock at night because I wanted mangoes. I left the house without putting on shoes I didn't want to wear. I took a bath at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday for no reason. I stayed up past midnight reading a book because nobody had set a curfew. I ate breakfast at 11 and dinner at 4 and a sandwich at midnight, and nobody stood between me and any of it. I gained 6 pounds in 14 days, and every single ounce felt like armor. 2 weeks after Nadira removed him from the house, his parents invited me to a conversation. When I arrived, Rowan was sitting in his parents' living room. He looked diminished, smaller than I remembered. His mother was on one side of the room. His father was on the other. They had clearly been arguing before I walked in. Tariq spoke first. He said they had consulted with a counselor who specialized in controlling behavior. He said the counselor told them that what Rowan had done was coercive control and classified as domestic abuse regardless of whether any physical violence had occurred. He said restricting a partner's access to food was among the most severe forms of abuse documented. He used that word, abuse. Rowan's legs started bouncing. Nadira looked at me and said she wanted to know what I wanted. She said if I chose to stay in the marriage, they would require Rowan to attend long-term counseling, and there would be regular check-ins, and Nadira herself would visit unannounced whenever she wanted. She said if I chose to leave, they would not contest it, and they would ensure I was supported financially during the transition. She said the house remained mine either way. She said whatever I decided, they would respect it fully and without argument. Rowan opened his mouth and Tariq said not yet. I sat there, and I looked at this man who had made me call him daddy before I could eat a plate of food in my own home. This man who watched me cry over meals and felt satisfied. This man who threw away crackers I had hidden like a prisoner smuggling bread. The man who timed how long I could survive on nothing before I broke. The man who took my shoes so I couldn't run. I looked at him and I waited to feel something. Rage or grief or even pity. Nothing came. Something had been emptied out of me during those 6 weeks, and whatever it was, it hadn't come back, and I don't think it ever will. I said I wanted a divorce. The room went quiet. Rowan's eyes went wide. He said, "You can't be serious. We've only been married 2 months. You haven't even given this a chance." Tariq said she's serious. Rowan looked at his mother. Nadira was looking at the floor. He looked back at me, and I watched him realize for the first time in his life that no one in the room was on his side. The divorce took 4 months. Rowan tried to contest it once. He showed up at the attorney's office during a mediation session and said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. His own attorney told him to sit down. When my attorney presented the saved messages, including the threats and the admissions of controlling behavior, Rowan's attorney went quiet for a long time and then advised his client to cooperate. His parents kept every promise. Nadira paid the bills on the house while I searched for work. She came by once a week to check on me. She never came unannounced again. She always called first. She understood what surprise visitors meant to someone who had been living in a controlled environment. I found a position at a medical office 3 weeks after the meeting. The interview was short. The office manager asked me about my availability, and I almost said I needed to check with someone before I remembered there was no one to check with. I could work any hours. I could stay late. I could come early. Every question she asked me I answered for myself, and the freedom of that was so sharp it almost hurt. The pay was modest, but every dollar was mine. On my first day, my supervisor told me the break room was stocked with snacks, and I could help myself anytime. She said it like it was nothing, like access to food was the most ordinary thing in the world. I went to the restroom afterward and sat in a stall and pressed my hands over my mouth and cried because a stranger had offered me more basic dignity in one sentence than my husband had given me in our entire marriage. I signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning at my attorney's office. My hand was steady. I didn't hesitate. The pen felt light. My attorney looked at me when I finished and said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Hungry." She didn't understand. I said, "It's a good thing." I drove home afterward and sat in the car for a while. I wasn't sad. I was recalibrating, trying to remember who I was before a man decided I needed to earn the right to eat, trying to find the person who existed before the rules and the schedule and the word that still made me flinch when I heard it in any context. It's been 11 months now. I live alone in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where nobody knows my name and nobody has a key except me. The first thing I bought when I moved in was a full set of groceries, and I put them all in my refrigerator and my pantry, and I left the doors unlocked because there was nobody to lock them against. I filled every shelf. I bought things I didn't even need just to see them sitting there available and mine. I cook every night, and I eat standing up sometimes, or on the couch or at the table or on the floor if I feel like it. I eat with my hands sometimes. I eat cereal for dinner and leftover curry for breakfast, and I snack at 3 in the morning if I wake up hungry. Nobody watches me eat. Nobody decides if I've earned it. Nobody makes me perform for a plate. I talk to my parents twice a week. They still carry guilt. My mother asks me every call if I've eaten, and I always say yes, and she always says good. I tell them to let it go, but I understand why they can't. Nadira calls once a month. She sends me recipes, and I send her pictures of what I make, and she always responds the same way. That looks wonderful. She told me last month that Rowan finished his mandated counseling and moved to a different city. She said he hasn't contacted me, and if he does, to call her immediately. I told her he won't. She said just in case. I went to a restaurant recently. A coworker set me up with someone she thought I'd like. We sat across from each other, and the waiter came and asked what I'd like to order. And for 3 or 4 seconds, nothing